Hey everyone, it's Tara. Welcome to my YouTube channel, and if you've been here before, welcome back to my channel. Now, I know I literally suddenly came back to YouTube and then all of a sudden disappeared again just as quickly. That was not the plan, by the way, but what I'm learning in these last couple of weeks is that nothing really goes to plan, and it's kind of impossible to make any kind of plan when you're a parent. Yes, that is right. I am a parent. I had my baby boy almost 7 weeks ago now. He will be 7 weeks on Sunday, which is just crazy to me in itself. My concept of time is really just, I just don't have a concept of time. I barely even know what day of the week it is most times. So the fact that I literally had a baby almost 7 weeks ago blows my mind, as much as I'm sure some of you watching blows your mind as well. So yes, I did have a baby 7 weeks ago, and what I wanted to do today was really just sit down with you guys and share my birth story. I wanted to share my experience, and I'm kind of going to be going into a bit of detail on my experience because I felt that when I was pregnant or before I got pregnant, I turned to these videos a lot to kind of get some tips, see what I was expecting, that kind of thing, and I found it very helpful when people went quite into detail in their birth story videos, and so that's what I want to do today. So just so you know, if you're my family or you're a family friend, you might want to click off of this video if you don't want to hear all of the TMI information that I'm about to give. But if you do want to hear, please stick around. I'm so excited to share this experience with you guys and tell you guys what went on. So if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, comment down below if you have any video ideas that you want to see me do, and of course turn on post notifications if you want to know when I'm posting. And please go follow me on Instagram. It is down in the description down below. You can get some really cute baby updates throughout the week and just keep up to date with what I'm doing in day-to-day life when I'm not here on YouTube. Okay, so this birth story kind of begins at my 36-week ultrasound. Now, I just want to quickly, before we get into it, I just want to quickly mention that throughout my whole pregnancy, during every single ultrasound, I was always told that Mason was quite a big baby. He was quite large. He was always weighing like above average. And I constantly was told like, oh, you have a big baby and blah, blah, blah throughout my pregnancy. But that was kind of all I heard. There wasn't really many talks. They said that he was super healthy, even though he was really big. There wasn't really too much to be concerned, so things were good. Flash forward to my 36-week appointment where this story kind of begins. So I went to my 36-week ultrasound. They checked him out. Again, I was told that he was quite large. He was weighing above average. And then this is where, for the first time, they mentioned the possibility of wanting to induce me. But they couldn't confirm or say anything, the ultrasound people. So I had to wait for the Wednesday after for my 37-week midwife appointment. So, flash forward to my midwife appointment. I go in and she checks out the heart rate, the size, the everything. And then she sits down and we start talking about my ultrasound. So in my ultrasound at 36 weeks, Mason was weighing about 7.9 pounds. And she was talking to me about this, and this is very above average. I think at that point he was like 65 percentile. I'm pretty sure he was like around 65 percentile for his weight, which is very above average. And so she was quite concerned at this point. Now, the concern here was that I was going to be pushing out a 10-pound baby. And if you do know me, you know that I'm very short. I'm around 5'3", 5'4". I don't know my exact height, but I know that I'm around that height. So I am very short, and I'm also very small framed. I don't have hips. I don't really have a lot of anything on me, to be fair. I'm very small framed, and so to me the idea of pushing out a 10-pound baby is terrifying, but to the doctors and that, me pushing out a 10-pound baby was quite concerning. They were worried about me and they were worried about the baby, and so we both kind of came to the conclusion that I would be getting induced, and that is when I was booked for an induction on the 19th of February at 1 p.m. To be fair, and I just want to put this in there, when I found out I was going to be induced, I kind of already knew, after the ultrasound where they told me that he was quite big, I kind of already knew that this was going to be the decision. And to be fair, to be real with you guys, if they had said that they didn't want to induce me, that it was fine to keep going, I probably would have pushed for an induction anyway, because from about 32 weeks maybe, I was completely over pregnancy. Now, I loved being pregnant, to be fair, and to be completely frank with you guys, there are times where I still miss being pregnant. I loved being pregnant. There were a couple of issues, but my pregnancy overall was not horrible. But by 32 weeks, I was quite large, which I'm not used to. As I said, I'm quite small framed. I've never really had a whole lot of weight on me, so I was quite large. I was having back pain. Just by 32 weeks, I was completely over it. I wanted my body back. I wanted to feel semi-normal again, and I really just wanted to meet my baby. I think that was the worst thing. I was getting so impatient to meeting my baby. All I wanted was to just have my baby in my arms. I was tired of waiting. So if they had not given me an induction, I probably would have pushed for one, argued for one, and really hoped that I got it. So I was very happy that I was being induced. And again, he was going to be safer that way. I knew that they were going to be able to take care of him, and he was going to be safer. So all over, I was pretty happy to be induced. So moving on to the 19th of February at 1 p.m. Leading up to going into the hospital, I really hit that terrified stage. I think it was the day before where I hit the terrified stage, but on the actual day, I was petrified. I was so nervous all day. It was all I could think about. I was terrified. But I went in at 1 p.m. Well, Aiden and I went in at 1 p.m. And when we got there, the hospital was crazy. So during COVID, it seems like everyone was getting pregnant, which meant that there were so many babies being born in the beginning of 2021. And unfortunately for me, the weekend that I decided to be induced, that I was being induced, everyone seemed to be giving birth the same weekend. I personally know of 3 people who gave birth the same weekend that I did. So the hospital was crazy. And when we went in at 1 p.m, it really showed. We had to go and sit in the waiting room for about an hour until about 2 because they did not have a bed for me. And then finally at 2 o'clock I was taken into a ward. However, I was not taken into my own ward. I had to share a ward with another person. Now, I know this other person now. We've spoken. We're like friends on Facebook. We talk. We're like friends. She's super sweet. Love her. But I shared a ward with another person for the first half of the night, which I will get into. But really, it wasn't that big of an issue. There was like a partition, and she also didn't come in until like 2 hours later. So I had the room to myself for like 2 hours, and then I think she came in like 2 hours after me. So anyway, so I go in to the room. We got all set up, prepped. They put like a heart monitor thing on me to listen to baby's heartbeat and test for contractions if I'm having any or anything like that. And so I was sort of just checked and monitored. The baby's heart rate was monitored for about an hour, and then at about 2:33 o'clock. Now also, I'm just going to quickly mention my time frames and things might be a little bit off, but I'm going to try and get them as precise as possible. So at about 2:33 o'clock, the induction process began. So the first thing that I had to be induced was a thing called Cervidil, and it's basically like a little paper. Basically looks like the string of a tampon, but just by itself. There's no like actual tampon bit. It's basically just like the string, and basically this Cervidil is got like a bunch of medicines on it, I believe, and it's basically inserted, and it's supposed to be in there for, it can be in there for a max of 24 hours, but it mostly works by about 12 hours. So they inserted, and then basically left me for 6 hours, and I was going to be checked 6 hours later. So I had this Cervidil in, didn't really feel anything at all. The insertion was not that, painful or anything like that. It was pretty easy. And then basically it was just a waiting game. So Aiden and I were watching YouTube, we were on our phones, we were basically pretty bored and we're just chilling for 6 hours. And yeah, and in between those 6 hours, the girl who I was sharing the ward with came in around 2 hours later, and she didn't get her Cervidil until, I believe, 4 hours later. I just need to preface this for the future of my story. So yes, she didn't end up getting her Cervidil until about 4 hours later. Anyway, flash forward 6 hours, they came and they did an examination on me to check if I was dilated. Basically, the Cervidil, what it's supposed to do is it's to soften the cervix enough so that my waters might break naturally on their own, or so that the doctors are able to break my waters manually with a little thing and break my waters for me. So they checked me at 6 hours, and basically I had made absolutely no progress. I was not dilated, I was not effaced. There was absolutely nothing happening down there. It was just kind of in there. However, I did begin to start getting somewhat of contractions. They were basically like butterflies at this point. They were not painful at all. It literally was like I was just like tight and then would release, and I didn't feel any pain from it, but I was getting like the mildest contractions possible. I could feel them, and I remember like laying there and saying to Aiden like, oh, I have a contraction coming right now, but like while I'm saying that to Aiden, that I was having a contraction, like it wasn't bothering me at all. I was still able to go on with my night. The contractions were literally the most mild thing ever, and they weren't bothering me at all, and I had made absolutely no progress. So the nurse said that she would keep me where I was, and basically they were going to come back at 2 o'clock in the morning to re-examine me and see if I'd made any more progress. So the reason I mentioned the girl earlier that I was sharing a room with was this. So I think the hardest part of my birth experience, to be fair, was the induction process, which I'll get more into as well. But one of the other things that I really struggled with was this girl that came in 2 hours after me and had the Cervidil put in 4 hours after me. She was so lucky to have the Cervidil work in the first, I don't know how many hours, but in the first couple of hours, her Cervidil worked, she started making progress, and she started going into labour very quickly. Now, being in a shared ward, I could hear everything. I could hear her telling the nurse that she was starting to feel contractions. She obviously was in pain. I could hear her in pain. She was getting up and down to go to have a shower. She was quite emotional. Obviously, she's in pain, rightfully so, and this is nothing against her, but on my side of the curtain, I'm over here feeling contractions that aren't painful. I'm making absolutely no progress, and I've been in here way longer than her, and it was very disheartening to hear somebody who is going through the same thing as you right at that moment, but is pacing along quicker. And it was really just disheartening to know that within the next few hours or within the next day, she was going to have her baby, and I was still there not knowing how long it was going to be until I had my baby, and not knowing how long I was going to be in a hospital for, and overall just sucked hearing someone else go into labour when you're just sitting there and literally nothing is happening. So at about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, this girl that I was sharing a ward with, her and her partner left, and she was moved to a labour ward to get things started. And so at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was in a room by myself which I also forgot to mention. At around 11, Aiden had to leave due to COVID and all that kind of stuff, so he had to leave. So I was home. I was in the hospital by myself, and yeah, that was not fun. I could not sleep, not because of pain, or I just couldn't sleep. It's a hospital, you don't sleep in hospitals, and also the fact that I knew that weekend I was going to have a child, and it was just incredibly daunting. So I got barely any sleep. I felt like I finally got to sleep, and then the nurse came in and checked me at 2 o'clock. When she checked me at 2 o'clock in the morning, she examined me, and I had not dilated and at all still. I was not effaced. There was absolutely no progress being made whatsoever, and again I was told that I just had to wait it out another 6 hours, which would take me to the 12 hours of the Cervidil where it usually works, and so I just had to wait. So the nurse left, and I did manage to finally fall asleep. I got some sleep, and Aiden came back at about 8 o'clock in the morning. I was brought in breakfast, and again at this point still was feeling nothing, was having contractions that were kind of mild, very inconsistently. They were not painful at all. There was just tightenings that kept happening. It wasn't painful, really nothing was happening. So yeah, so then Aiden came in, I got some breakfast. Don't ask me about what the food was in there because I can't remember at all. But I know that it wasn't great. I know that. But I don't know what I had. But I had some breakfast, and then a nurse came in and checked me at again, I don't know the times, but a nurse came in and checked me just after breakfast and re-examined me again, and still no progress had been made. I still had not dilated at all, and still just nothing was happening. But I was getting to the point of the 24 hours at this point that I had the Cervidil in, and the Cervidil can only be in for 24 hours, and so I was hitting that mark of 24 hours, so they did need to get it out and try something new. So I waited a couple more hours. A nurse came in, and she told us that we were going to be moved to a labour ward, which got my hopes up very, very much. My hopes were very, very high when she said that. So we moved to the labour ward. We went in. We were in the labour ward for about an hour. She came back in. She re-examined, and still nothing was happening down there wise. However, while I was moved into the labour room, my contractions began to get a little bit more consistent and a bit painful at this point. Not overly painful, it just started to feel a bit like period cramps, like a mild period cramp. But they definitely were more consistent. I was getting them more every so minutes. And so they were a little bit more consistent, and I was getting some kind of contractions. It was a little bit painful. So the doctors kind of started to get a little bit hopeful that I was going to progress on my own. Obviously they had to take the Cervidil out, so that happened. She re-examined, nothing was happening. She took the Cervidil out, and her professional opinion was to wait 2 hours to see if I was going to do anything on my own. So we were left in the labour room for 2 hours on our own, and my body was supposed to just do its thing and naturally begin somewhat of a process. 2 hours later, I was re-examined again, and something had happened. There was definitely a little bit of dilation. I think she said at that point, which I think was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I think at that point she said that I was maybe 2 centimeters dilated, which 2 out of 10 is still I still have a long way to go. So I was about 2 centimeters dilated, so I'd managed to do that myself, but it still was not enough. So they started the next process, which they gave me these gels. Now, the point of the gels is basically the same as the Cervidil, just to soften the cervix enough so that my waters might break naturally, or the doctors can manually break my waters. But I don't know a lot about what the gel is, honestly how it was put in, no idea how that works. All I know is I had some kind of gel that has some kind of medicine that's supposed to do its job. So I had the gels put in, and I believe around about 4-5 o'clock on Saturday, and then I had to wait another 6 hours to be re-examined to see if these gels had worked. During these 6 hours that I had from when I had the gels in to when I was being re-examined, I began feeling the contractions. They were a lot more intense and they were a lot more consistent. I was getting them every 5 minutes, I want to say, and they were a lot more intense. I started to feel like I couldn't talk through them. I had to sort of just really focus, and yeah, so definitely started to feel the contractions a lot more. And then by the time she came in at, I want to say midnight or something like that. Again, my timing makes absolutely no sense to me. I didn't really have a watch. Wasn't really looking at the clock time. I'm not really sure, but I believe it was around about midnight or something like that. She came in, she re-examined me, and at this point I had finally, after almost 2 days, had finally made some kind of progress. I think I'd moved to a 4cm, 5cm dilated, and so things were starting to happen. Want to quickly point out, I did have a vaginal birth, but I did have an epidural, and I opted for the epidural pretty much the minute that I found out I was pregnant. I just wanted to preface that. They didn't tell me I needed the epidural, which I don't think that they ever do, but nobody told me I needed the epidural. I didn't wait until I was halfway in labor to want the epidural. I knew I wanted the epidural the minute I walked in the hospital. I was like, I'm getting an epidural at some point during this weekend, and I believe I mentioned it pretty much every time I saw a nurse. I want an epidural, just so they knew, because I did not want to get to the point where I couldn't have it and stuff like that. So yes, I believe I was at a 5cm or something like that, and they were pretty confident that they would be able to go in and manually break my waters. And so I believe it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning at this point, that they came in and they managed to break my waters. So yeah, they broke my waters at around about 5 o'clock in the morning. And that was such a weird experience. If you've never had your waters broken before, it's what I call a knitting needle. It looks like one of those knitting needles, and they just go in and they, break your waters. Now, something I want to point out that I wasn't aware of, or that nobody talked about, and this is just for me, I believe. I don't know if this is the case for people who naturally break their waters, but for me, when I had my waters broken, it was like it was in the movies. So I heard throughout my whole pregnancy and pretty much my whole life that when you give birth, it's nothing like it is in the movies. It isn't a big gush, it just trickles, that kind of thing. And so I was kind of preparing for that. However, when my waters were manually broken, it was a gush. There was so much water. Half of my baby weight, half of my pregnancy weight was just liquid. I swear to you, the minute they broke my waters, I literally deflated, and I looked like I was maybe 12 weeks pregnant at max, and which is crazy because I had a 7-something pound baby still inside me, but I literally looked like I was 12 weeks pregnant as soon as they broke my waters, and I literally just saw my stomach deflate. It was the weirdest experience of my life, so weird. So my waters broke, and the contractions started getting super intense, the biggest pain I've ever felt. And I'm not trying to scare anyone who's watching this that's about to do it, but the contractions were so painful. I was someone who have very, very heavy periods my whole life. My cramps are always terrible, so I went into it kind of thinking, well, my cramps have always been terrible. They've always been very, very intense and very, very strong, and so I'm going to get through contractions like it's nothing. Well, when I finally had proper intense contractions that were coming every couple of minutes, they were so intense, I wasn't able to talk. I would literally tense up, at one point I was shaking. I was getting hot and cold fevers just from how bad the contractions were. And I think like I said, I wanted the epidural. When they broke my waters, I said, I want my epidural, how quickly can I get it? They said within an hour, half an hour, I would get my epidural. So I went through an hour of contractions, and then I finally got my epidural. Now, getting the epidural is a whole nother experience in itself. For one, I'm terrified of needles, so that doesn't help. I'm terrified of needles, and the needle is big. I'm not going to scare anyone. The needle is big. That's all I'm going to say. But the process of the epidural is actually really, really weird. And I don't know if I'm just not looking, but I swear not a lot of people talk about this. They get epidurals. So the epidural is put in, and it honestly was the most weirdest experience of my life. So while he was putting the epidural in, they kept saying to me, we need you not to move. We need you to sit still so that this like block is what they call it does its job. Otherwise, I'm going to have areas where I feel pain and areas where I don't feel pain. So to make it like an even block so I don't feel any kind of pain, I really needed to stay still. Now this was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, was staying still. Now remember that they're literally sticking like a needle in your back, and then they're putting in like a medicine thing. If you ever want to look at the process of getting an epidural, I highly recommend it. It's actually quite interesting if you're not going through it. Do not Google it when you're pregnant. I did that. It was not a good idea. Maybe do it after you had your baby. I don't know. But it is really interesting if you do want to look at an epidural process, because I found it super interesting after the fact. I shouldn't have Googled it during. But anyway, so I was getting my epidural, and staying still was probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life, because body's instinct is when something is painful, when you get hurt, is to jerk forward. Your nerves making you jump forward, or make you move, or make you shake, or whatever. And so getting the epidural is no different. My body's human reaction when it was hurting in my back was to jump forward, which you shouldn't do, because like I said, you need an even block so that all of you is numb. So I really struggled with getting the epidural, because like I just kept jumping forward and like moving side to side, because it was quite painful and quite uncomfortable. I wouldn't say painful, because you do get like a general anesthetic beforehand, but it was quite a painful, like weird, like pressure-y experience happening. So yes, I kept jerking forward and jumping forward, but not even just like the jerking forward. There was one point where he said to me, okay, I'm just going to brush against your nerves, you are going to feel it, but you really need to try and stay as still as possible. And when he did that, I was preparing myself to jump forward like I had been the whole time, but this time was different, and he did whatever he did back there, and my leg like shook out, like it just was like shake, and I had absolutely no control over it. Like I could not stop it. Yeah, it just was really hard to stay still. But eventually I did get the epidural, and I actually got like a completely even block. The epidural began working within like, I want to say like a minute, and my legs, so from, I'm just going to stand up to show you. So from like here, I'm short so you can't really see, but from here down, I could feel absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. I was numb from there down, and it was great. I couldn't really feel contractions. I could definitely tell that there was pressure. So when I was having contractions, there was like a lot of pressure, and I just felt like I was very tight and tense, and then it would like go away. But it was not painful at all, and it worked within like a minute. So much that the nurse and the people in the labour room with me had to move me onto the bed because I couldn't move myself. So they also just want to mention is that they put the epidural, like they tape it to your back, and so it's like laying, like when you're laying down on your back, because obviously you can't be sitting up or anything like that. When you're laying down on your back, there's like this epidural line like going up your back, and I was given a thing, like a button that you can like push, and it like pushes the epidural in if I was starting to feel any kind of pain or anything like that. So like I said, once the epidural was in, and I had the like button, I literally could not feel nothing. I could just feel pressure and tightenings, and I actually managed to get some sleep. I think I only slept for me I remember falling asleep, and I remember it feeling like 10 minutes, but in reality it was actually like maybe an hour. So I got about maybe an hour's worth of sleep, and then I woke up, and then the nurse came in. They also watch you on like the monitors on the contraction measuring thing. I really don't know doctor words, but she was able to watch me from the computers at the reception, like my contractions and how quick they were and blah blah blah. She came in, and she said that things were really, really looking good, and she just wanted to check me again. So I was examined, and at this point, I was 10 centimeters. And I think I was 10 centimeters at about 5:30 in the morning, something like that. Again, time frame, completely off. But I'm pretty sure it was about 5:30 something in the morning. And yeah, I was 10 centimeters dilated. But the doctor that was supposed to help me with my labor was actually called into an emergency labor in the room next to me for a woman who was having twins. My God, poor thing. I couldn't even imagine. So yeah, he was actually called into there. So the nurse comes in and she's examined me. I'm 10 centimeters dilated, and she says, okay, so we're going to get your legs up in the stirrups, which is like these, like, basically like a horse, but like, yeah. So she's like, we're gonna get your legs up, we're gonna get you ready, we're gonna prep you, and then we're gonna do some practice pushes before the doctor gets here. So I put my legs up in the like stirrup thingies, and she gets all ready, does whatever she has to do, and then we start my practice pushes. So we began the practice pushes, and after my first practice push, she was like, you know, counting 1 to 10. She was like, you know, telling me what I had to do. After my first practice push, she turned to someone in the room and said, could you just push that yellow button behind me? And that terrified the heck out of me. I was like, what do you mean? I remember saying to her, like, is everything okay? What's happening? And she was like, no, everything's okay, but these practice pushes are no longer practice pushes because I can see ahead. So after my first push, I was already beginning, well, after my first practice push, I was already beginning to crown, and she could see like the top of his head. So she said, things are happening now. We're just gonna have to do it without the doctor. So she got in like an assistant to help her, and we began the pushing process. And this began at about 6 o'clock in the morning. We began the pushing process, and so I pushed, and honestly, again, I couldn't feel any pain. I could feel a lot of pressure like going down, but I couldn't feel any pain because of the epidural, and anytime I did feel pain, I had the button still, and I just kept pushing that thing. Like, I literally pushed that thing so hard. Now, I found out later after birth that you're actually not supposed to do this, and that the nurse was actually supposed to take it away from me once I got to the pushing stage, but she didn't because she knew that I needed to not feel the pain to get through it, so she kept it. I found that out like a week later, and I was like, oh my God, the nurse that I had, thank Jesus. Because yeah, I literally the entire labor and the pushes was holding that thing. I'm pretty much just holding it down, and I was constantly getting epidural like boosters, which was not supposed to be the case apparently, but I'm so thankful that that's what happened to me. So yeah, so I was pushing and pushing. I believe that I only pushed about 6, 7, maybe 8 times. So my birth overall, like the actual from the point where I started pushing to when he came out, was only about an hour, which is pretty good after me being in the induction process for almost 2 days. An hour, so good. So yeah, I couldn't really feel anything. I could feel a lot of pressure. I was just pushing and pushing, but the worst part of it was that my body was so weak. I was so out of breath. I was so tired. Like, I was like falling asleep halfway through, and I had to keep like opening my eyes, and they had to keep like waking me up. I was so tired, and my body was so weak that I like could barely like move. Like, I just kept going in and out. Like, I just felt so weak. And then there was a point where I was so weak and so exhausted that I just remember like could not keep my head up. I was so tired. I remember closing my eyes, and I remember her saying to me, like, don't fall asleep, you can do this, he's going to be here in the next couple of pushes, you need to push, like, keep pushing, you can do this. I remember her saying that to me, but as she was saying that to me, like, my eyes were just like closing, and I just completely zoned out. I could kind of hear everyone sort of talking and a lot of things happening, but I completely zoned out. And then I honestly felt like I was asleep for like 20 minutes. Like my concept of time was gone, and while when I did eventually wake up, I swear I was asleep for like 20 minutes. I was actually only asleep for like 1.5 seconds or something like that. I didn't even actually even fall asleep, but I remember closing my eyes and then feeling like I was asleep for like 20 minutes. I remember closing my eyes, and then the thing that woke me was I could feel them pressing on my stomach, and it felt like heavy. Like I could feel like my stomach was so heavy, like they had just put like a weight on me. And I was like, what are they doing? I was like, has something happened? And I have a habit of taking things to the extreme in my mind, and things going like way further than they need to, and in my head it's worst case scenario every single time something happens. So in my mind, when I felt this like heaviness on my stomach, I was like, oh my god, I've fallen asleep during labor, I've made complications, they're now cutting me open, I'm getting a C-section right now. Oh my god, I was too terrified to open my eyes. I remember like laying there and I was like, oh my god, what is happening? I was like 2, but I was too scared to open my eyes. Finally, I opened my eyes, and they had Mason on my chest, and they were like, he's here, you did it. And I was like, wait, what? I literally fell asleep. Literally, in my mind, was asleep for 20 minutes. How have I been doing this? I don't remember pushing the last couple pushes. I don't remember anything. I literally just remember feeling this weight, terrifying myself that right now they were cutting me open because I fell asleep and something had happened. And I remember opening my eyes, and I had this baby on me, and he was like crying, and everyone was like, oh my god, you did such a good job. And I was in so much shock. I remember just like for like maybe 10 to 15 seconds, I just sat and stared at him, and I was like, oh my god, like I actually did it. And then I burst out crying, and I could not stop. I was so emotional. I was so happy that I finally had him, and it honestly, when they say was the best feeling ever, it is the best feeling ever. And they always say that it, like, once you have your baby on your chest, like all the pain of the pregnancy and all the struggles and all the hard moments will disappear. And honestly, that was so true for like 10 to 15 seconds. And then I came to and realized that I was being stitched up and I was in pain, and I remembered every single painful thing in my pregnancy. But it lasted like 10-15 seconds where I was just staring at this beautiful baby boy, and he was mine, and I had done it, and we officially had him now forever. And it was the greatest moment of my life. They were like cleaning him off, and I was just hugging him. And honestly, when he came out, he was crying. He cried for a couple of seconds, and the minute that he was sort of put on my chest, he just stopped crying, and he was just kind of like, you know, looked like opening his eyes, and just, he looked at me a little bit, and I was just staring at him. And I had no idea what was happening, by the way. Once they put the baby on me, no idea what was happening. Everyone else was like blind, like I couldn't see them. I was blind. All I could see was me and Mason at that point. And it honestly was like the best couple minutes of my life, just like holding him and feeling good. And it was just great. Like, it was so weird. Like, it felt like an out-of-body experience that, like, once he was on my chest, like a part of me like came back into my body. I struggled a lot throughout my pregnancy, I think, with like identity issues. Like, I struggled feeling like I wasn't myself, I didn't look like myself. It just was, I feel like everyone in pregnancy goes through this. I never felt like quite myself. Everything sort of felt different. My hormones were everywhere. I never really felt the same mood like ever. So once Mason was on me, I felt this like out-of-body experience, and I felt like my body kind of like float down from the air back into myself, and straight away I felt like me again. It was very weird. I can't really explain it, but that's the best way I can try to explain it. So yeah, they had him on me for a bit, and then I gave him to Aiden, and Aiden got to hold him for the first time, and oh my gosh, seeing Aiden hold our son for the first time literally was the best feeling in the world. I remember tearing up again just seeing Aiden hold our baby. Like, it was just, oh, it was the best thing in the world. Like, and Aiden looked like the happiest I've ever seen him in his whole life. Like, it was just the greatest experience. And then Aiden and the nurse took him over there to get weighed, and in this meantime I was having some stitches and doing things done. So in terms of stitching and tears and all of that, I don't actually know any degree of tear. I don't really know how many tears or stitches I do have, and that was because it was in my birth plan not to know. My mind frame, which I think I mentioned in my pregnancy video, but my mind frame of not knowing how many stitches I had or how bad the tears were was, if I don't know how bad they are, it won't be as painful. Because for me, if I get like a cut, it's not until someone says that I'm bleeding that I even notice the cut, or it's not until someone says like, oh, are you okay, what happened to your leg, that I'm like, oh yeah, that really hurts actually. So I figured that it'd be kind of the same in birth, that if they didn't tell me how bad it was, I wouldn't know how painful it was. And honestly, I still kind of stand by that statement. Not knowing, I feel like, was so good. So I don't know how many stitches I got. All I know that I was being stitched up for probably about half an hour. So it must have been somewhat bad. She said it wasn't as bad as what she had seen before in her lifetime. But then again, she's probably seen some bad ones, so I don't actually even know what that means. But she said it was not the worst that she had seen. I didn't have any like hemorrhaging or anything like that, so that was good. I do know, however, from my own stupidity, not because they told me, but I do know that I did end up having to have an episiotomy, which, if you have stayed this whole video and have listened to the TMI and I'm okay with it, but don't want to hear about really TMI, please click off. I'm telling you, you've heard my birth story, you don't want to hear this. So, an episiotomy is basically they have to cut the downstairs to get the head out. So at some point they had to cut my downstairs to get his head out. Again, I don't know when because I was out of it, but they did have to cut the downstairs at some point to get his head out. So I did end up having an episiotomy, and I kind of wish I didn't know that, because like I said, that was the one thing that I knew that I did have, and the entire recovery process I knew that I was cut downstairs, so I kept thinking about that one cut. And the reason I found out that I had an episiotomy was my own fault. When I got the discharge papers after leaving the hospital, like when we were leaving the hospital and I got the discharge papers, I was reading through the discharge papers, and I kept reading this word, episiotomy, had to have episiotomy, oh my god. I kept reading this word, episiotomy, oh my god, I can't say the word right. Episiotomy, I think that's what it's, I cannot say it right, but I kept reading that word over and over and over and over again, and I was like, what the heck is this word that's in my discharge papers like 6 times? And when they were writing it in like the medicine issues, and I was like, as far as I knew, I didn't have any issues during my pregnancy, so why are they writing this? So I decided to do a Google search, and I Google searched, saw a couple pictures, but that didn't stop there. Then I went, okay, so it's a cut downstairs, but I don't understand. Like, when does this happen? So I decided to watch a video of someone performing an episiotomy, which I would not suggest. Don't do it. Because like I said, once I knew I had an episiotomy and what it was and when it happened, I swear that side was way more painful than it would have been if I hadn't known that I'd had it. So I stand by my statement. If you aren't good with pain, tell them not to tell you the amount of stitches and things you're having, because that really, really helped me. But yeah, that was my birth experience. Overall, I had a pretty good birth experience. If I was to do it again, the one thing that I probably would avoid is honestly the induction again. If I have another child and I don't need to have an induction, I probably won't opt for one. Even though at 32 weeks I was struggling, I was over it, and I wanted my baby, and I was going to ask for the induction in my first pregnancy. If I ever get pregnant again, I definitely will not be opting for one. I will go to the full term and suck it up and go through it if I have to, because I definitely won't do the induction process again. It took me 2 days. It was painful. The examinations, every time they examined me, was just getting more and more painful because I was getting more and more tender and sore and exhausted. My body was just over it. So they were getting more and more painful every time, and so I probably wouldn't get induced again just because it did take my body so long. I kind of wonder, had I gone naturally, would things have been different? I don't know. So if I do ever have another pregnancy, I'm definitely going to do things different and not get induced, unless, again, medically I have to. But yeah. So when Mason came out, he was 7 pounds exactly, which even the nurses after he came out didn't really know why I was being induced, because he wasn't that overweight. 7 pounds is what a normal baby comes out as, so not really sure where they were going. Sometimes the ultrasound can be wrong, sometimes it can be read wrong. Not really sure what they read, but he did only come out 7 pounds exactly, and he was 50 centimeters in length, which is like in the 80 something percentile. So he was quite a tall baby. I feel like when he grows up, he's going to be very, very tall. He's definitely going to be taller than me super quickly, but then again, everyone's taller than me, so nothing really new. But he's definitely going to be taller than me pretty quickly. He's definitely going to get a height like his dad. And Aiden's puppy is also really, really tall, so I definitely think that Mason got his tallness and his length from Aiden's side. But yeah, he was 7 pounds, 50 centimeters, and he was a completely healthy baby. We both were very, very healthy. I recovered pretty quickly. I had to stay in the hospital so I gave birth on the Sunday morning at 7:09 a.m. and then I had to stay from Sunday until Tuesday, just because I had had the epidural, and I had had so much of the epidural that I wasn't mobile for the first 2 days. So the first day, could not walk at all. When I had to have a shower, the nurse had to put me in a wheelchair, and I had to sit in the shower to be showered, and the nurse had to help me shower. And then every time I needed to get up the first day, I needed help from Aiden. The second day I was able to get out of bed myself, but I was very slow. It was very, very hard to walk. And yeah, overall, I was just not very mobile until the day that I was leaving. And then that's when the day before I was leaving, so I left on the Tuesday, on the Monday was when I started to get more feeling back in my legs, and I was able to sort of walk around a bit more and that kind of thing. So that is why we ended up staying in the hospital a little bit more. And also on the first night, Mason's temperature kind of went down a little bit, and he was quite cold, so we had to use a light therapy thing to warm him up a little bit, but that was only for an hour or something the first night, and then he was all right. But yeah, but that was my birth experience. I hope it kind of has made sense. I hope if you're pregnant or you're trying to get pregnant or whatever, this video has helped you out a little bit, given you a little bit of insight into what could happen. Again, this is only my experience, so I can't say that everything that I went through will happen for you. I can't say the way the epidural affected me, I can't say it's going to affect you that way. But this was just my experience, but I hope it has helped. It's given you some insight, maybe some tips, maybe some advice. I hope this video has helped you. If not, I hope you enjoyed. And yeah, I will see you guys next week with a brand new video.